Abandoned Puppy and Kitten Find a Loving Home. A story that will move everyone to tears. What causes a car to stop in the middle of a deserted forest road during the worst snowstorm of the year? It's not a breakdown, nor the desire to wait out the storm. The headlights illuminate only a wall of trees and snowdrifts growing before their eyes. The passenger door swings open. For a moment, the interior is lit up, and in this light, movement can be seen. Quick, almost dismissive. A cardboard box flies onto the side of the road. It hits the snow with a dull thud and falls on its side. The door slams shut. The engine roars, and the red dots of the taillights quickly dissolve into the white mist. The silence, broken only by the howling wind, becomes absolute. Inside the box, two small calves huddle together, trembling. One is covered with short but thick fur of a classic brindle color. The large, clumsy paws of the German Shepherd puppy tremble, and its intelligent eyes are filled with animal terror. Next to him, curled up in a tight ball of smoky gray fur, hides a kitten. For its few months, it is strikingly large, with already noticeable tufts on its ears, betraying its Maine Coon breed. Their names were Thunder and Fluff, but those names remained there, in the warmth, in a past life that ended 10 minutes ago. Now they had nothing but each other and the cardboard walls, which were rapidly getting wet and freezing. Before we continue, let us know which city you are from. We are interested to know where our videos are being watched from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your rating. This motivates us to make new and interesting videos. Well, let's get started. The wind grew stronger with every passing minute. It penetrated the cracks in the box, bringing with it icy needles that dug into their fur and made them shiver even more. Grom, the puppy with the heart of a warrior, whimpered quietly, trying to nudge his little companion with his nose, as if checking to see if she was alive. Fluff didn't respond. She curled up in the farthest corner, trying to make herself as small as possible to retain every bit of warmth. The cold froze their movements, turning their breath into steam that immediately froze. An instinct as ancient as the world itself screamed at them that staying here meant death. But where to go? All around them was a roaring white void, hostile and merciless. The cardboard box, their last refuge, was becoming an icy trap. The wet walls sagged under the pressure of the snow and wind. Thunder was the first to realize this. He began to stir, trying to tear down the soggy barrier with his paws. His claws slipped, but he persisted. Finally, one of the walls gave way. A gust of stinging snow hit his face. The puppy recoiled, but his fear of the unknown was weaker than his fear of imminent death from the cold. He stuck his nose outside, inhaling the frosty air, and whimpered softly, calling for Fluff. The kitten, hearing his call, moved with difficulty. His paws did not obey him. His body was numb. But there was some hope in his friend's desperate whimpering. Pushinka slowly crawled toward the hole. Once out of the box, they were at the mercy of the elements. The blizzard knocked them off their feet, filling their eyes and noses with snow. They were two tiny dots in a vast, freezing world. Thunder, guided by instinct, stumbled forward, sinking into the loose snow. He walked at random, just away from the road, away from the place of their betrayal. Fluff followed him, stepping in his footsteps to conserve energy. Soon they came across a huge, old spruce tree. Its lower branches, heavy with snow, almost touched the ground, forming a kind of shelter. It was a refuge. With his last ounce of strength, Grom began to dig with his paws at the base of the trunk, trying to deepen the natural niche. Fluff, more agile, squeezed under the thickest branches and found a small hollow between the mighty roots. She made a quiet, inviting sound. Grom joined her. Here, protected from the wind, they huddled together. The puppy hugged the kitten with his body, sharing what little warmth he had left. Thus, in the struggle for life, their fragile but unbreakable union was born. The night was just beginning. The morning brought with it a deceptive silence. The blizzard subsided, and the pale winter sun broke through the thinning clouds. The forest, wrapped in a snow-white blanket, seemed fabulously beautiful and completely lifeless. For Thunder and Fluff, this beauty was deadly. The frost grew stronger, and their temporary shelter under the fir tree no longer saved them. The hunger, which they had hardly noticed at night because of the cold, now made itself felt with sharp, painful spasms. They were too weak. Grom tried to stand up, but his legs buckled. He whimpered in helplessness. Pushinka, whose body required less food, felt a little better. She crawled out from under the roots and began to explore the area. Her keen green eyes carefully examined every inch of snow. She climbed onto the lower branch of a fir tree, clinging to the icy bark with her claws. Perhaps there were some insects hiding under it. But everything was covered with a crust of ice. Her search was in vain. Despair began to take hold of them. They had endured a terrible night, but the day promised to be no less cruel. A few kilometers from the old spruce tree, in a small hut shrouded in smoke from the chimney, Yegor Matveyevich's day began. The old forester, a widower and recluse, lived according to a routine established decades ago. He rose with the first rays of the sun, lit the stove, and ate a simple breakfast. Today, in addition to his usual routine, he had to check the snares he had set the day before the blizzard. Throwing on a heavy sheepskin coat and picking up his old but reliable rifle, he left the house. The air burned his lungs. Yegor Matveyevich did not like winter. It reminded him of the silence that had settled in his house after his wife's death. He walked without hiding, his footsteps echoing in the frosty silence. After checking the first 2 snares, empty, he was about to turn back when his keen eye caught something unusual in the snow. Tracks, small, barely noticeable. Some looked like a puppy's, others like a cat's. But the strangest thing was that they ran, side by side, intertwining. The forester had lived in this forest all his life, but he had never seen anything like this. A puppy and a kitten together, in the middle of a winter forest, after such a blizzard. It was impossible. Curiosity, a feeling he had long considered dead within himself, took over. He decided to follow the trail. The tracks led him through the snow-covered undergrowth, winding between the trees. They were faint and intermittent, indicating the exhaustion of those who had left them. Yegor walked slowly, peering intently ahead. His heart, usually calm and steady, began to beat faster for some reason. He approached the very old spruce tree under which the children had been hiding. The tracks ended right at its base. The old man bent down, pushing aside a heavy, snow-covered branch. In the hollow between the roots, huddled close together so that it was difficult to tell them apart, lay 2 little balls of fur. They didn't move. Yegor held his breath. For a moment, he thought he was too late. He carefully reached out with his huge calloused hand in a mitten and touched a puppy. The body was cold, but under his fingers he felt a faint, barely perceptible tremor. Alive. Both of them. Damn, the old man muttered under his breath. But there was no anger in his voice, only a kind of bitter weariness. He didn't want this. He didn't want to save anyone or take care of anyone. His world was built and closed, but he couldn't just walk by. Carefully, Afraid of damaging their fragile bodies, he first took out the puppy, then the kitten, and hid them under the lining of his coat. There, close to his heart, was the warmest place, and he carried them home to his lonely hut, not yet knowing that this day would change his life forever. Returning to the hut, Yegor first laid his foundlings on an old sheepskin by the hot stove. They looked like two little ice cubes. He gently rubbed them with a dry cloth, trying to warm them up. Then he poured some warm goat's milk, which he had kept for himself, into a bowl and soaked a piece of bread in it. But Grom and Pushinka were too weak to eat. They were barely breathing, and their eyes were closed. Yegor did not sleep all night. He sat in his chair by the stove, tossing wood on the fire and watching the two little calves. In their quiet, desperate union, he saw a reflection of his own loneliness. Something in his hardened soul stirred. A day passed, then another. The calves began to come too. Grom was the first to wake up. He tried to stand on his unsteady legs and, staggering, took a few steps. Pushinka opened her eyes a little later. She lay motionless for a long time, only moving her ears, studying unfamiliar sounds and smells. Yegor placed a bowl of food in front of them. Thunder, driven by hunger, greedily pounced on the food. Pushinka was more cautious. She sniffed for a long time before taking her first sip. They did not trust the big, gloomy man. When Yegor tried to approach them, Grom growled quietly, and Pushinka immediately hid behind him. The old man did not insist. He just silently did his job. He put out food, changed the water, and kept the fire going in the stove. He gave them time. A few days later, Yegor noticed something was wrong. Pushinka became lethargic and refused to eat. Her breathing was heavy and wheezy, and at times she had a dry cough. The consequences of that terrible night were making themselves felt. The hypothermia had not passed without a trace. The old man realized that he could not do without the help of a specialist. With a heavy heart, he decided to go to the village. For the first time in a year, he started his old UAZ, which had been sitting idle under a shed. The trip was a real challenge for him. He was unaccustomed to people, noise, and civilization. He had known the veterinarian, Anna Sergeyevna, for a long time. A young, energetic woman, she was his complete opposite. Anna was surprised to see the unsociable forester standing at the door of her clinic with a cardboard box in his hands. After examining the kitten, she made her diagnosis: pneumonia. Antibiotics and injections were needed. Yegor listened silently, his face impassive. But Anna noticed how tightly he was clutching the edge of the box. She prescribed medication, showed him how to give injections, and gave him special food for weakened kittens. "You are a good man, Yegor Matveyevich," she said as he left. The old man just nodded gloomily and walked away. But for some reason, those words stuck in his head. On his way home, he thought about how no one had said anything like that to him in a very long time. The treatment was difficult. Pushinka was afraid of injections and tried to break free. But Grom, as if understanding everything, came over and lay down next to her, whimpering quietly and licking her fur. And Yegor, giving another injection with his clumsy, rough fingers, felt a long-forgotten tenderness awakening in his heart. And so, after a week, the crisis passed. Pushinka began to eat. Her breathing evened out. The ice melted not only in her little lungs, but also in the old forester's soul. One evening, when Yegor was sitting in his chair reading by the light of a kerosene lamp, Grom came up and nudged his hand with his wet nose. Then, emboldened, he brought him his find, Yegor's old mitten, which had fallen on the floor. It was the first sign of trust, the first step towards reconciliation. But the real breakthrough came a couple of days later. The fluffy kitten, which had kept its distance until then, suddenly jumped silently onto the old man's lap, curled up into a ball and, for the first time since its rescue, purred loudly and longingly. Yegor froze, afraid to move. He carefully placed his hand on her soft fur. And at that moment, he felt the icy wall he had built around his heart over the years crumble. But he did not yet know that the most terrible test for their newly found family was yet to come. That night, when a long, drawn-out howl, unlike a dog's bark, came from deep in the forest, he felt a chill run down his spine. Something hungry and dangerous was lurking nearby. The howl repeated itself. This time it was closer, so close that the thin glass in the window frame trembled slightly. Grom, who had been dozing at Yegor's feet, raised his head and let out a low, guttural growl. The hair on his neck stood on end. The fluff sleeping on the back of the chair woke up instantly. Her green eyes turned into two glowing coals in the dim light of the hut. She didn't make a sound, just tensed her whole body, turning into a tight spring. Yegor put down his book. He knew that sound. It wasn't a stray dog. It was a wolf, a lone wolf. The most dangerous beast in the winter forest, hungry, desperate, and fearless. The old man slowly got up and went to the window, carefully pulling back the edge of the curtain. There was no one in the moonlight flooding the snow-covered clearing in front of the house. But the feeling of a strange, hostile presence hung in the air. He checked the heavy bolt on the door. Sleep would be restless that night. The days flowed in a new rhythm, unfamiliar to Yegor. In the morning, he now cooked meals not only for himself. He talked to them, to Grom and Pushinka, and his own voice, which he had almost forgotten, no longer seemed strange and creaky to him. He told them about the habits of forest animals, about his wife Maria, who knew how to bake the most delicious bread in the world. The animals listened, bowing their heads, as if they understood every word. Grom became his shadow. He accompanied the old man when he went to gather firewood or check his snares. But he never strayed far into the forest, always keeping the hut in sight. Pushinka became the mistress of the house. She found herself an observation post on the wide windowsill and could watch the forest for hours, tracking the movement of every bird, every shadow. In the evenings, the three of them sat by the stove. Yegor repaired his fishing gear or carved figures out of wood. Grom lay at his feet, resting his heavy head on his boots, and Pushinka climbed onto his lap and created a long-forgotten coziness in the house with her measured purring. The old man caught himself thinking that he had stopped counting the days. He just lived. But the forest did not forget its presence. Once, returning from his rounds, Yegor saw them. Wolf tracks. They were only 100 meters from his house, large, clear prints in the fresh snow. The wolf had not just passed by. It had circled, studied, and watched. The chill that Yegor had felt that night returned. He went into the house, silently took his double-barreled shotgun off the nail, checked the cartridges, and leaned it against the wall by the door. Thunder, sensing the smell of gun oil and his master's anxiety, whimpered and rubbed against his leg. "Quiet, boy, everything's fine," said Yegor. But his voice sounded uncertain. He understood that the beast's hunger was stronger than caution. It was only a matter of time. He began to lock the old barn, where he had a few chickens left, with an extra bolt at night. Every night he listened to the sounds of the forest. But the wolf did not show itself again. A lull set in. It was uneasy, ringing like a taut string. Yegor almost began to believe that the predator had gone to other lands. Winter was coming to an end, and the faint breath of spring was already in the air. On one of those quiet evenings, when nothing foreshadowed trouble, he sat by the fire and showed Pushinka how to play with a paper bow on a string. The kitten, now a graceful young cat, jumped excitedly, catching her prey. Grom lay nearby and watched the game with lazy interest, sleepily waving his tail. The house was idyllic. At that very moment, a sound came from outside. Not a howl, but a short, furious crack of breaking wood, followed by the panicked, desperate clucking of chickens. The barn. Yegor jumped up so sharply that the chair behind him swayed. Grom was at the door in an instant, and from his chest came not a puppy's bark, but a furious, low roar, full of hatred for the uninvited guest. Pushinka flew onto the stove, her fur standing on end, turning her into a huge hissing ball. The old man didn't hesitate. He grabbed his rifle, pulled back the bolt, and rushed out onto the porch. The moon lit up the yard brightly. He saw a gray shadow appear through a hole in the barn wall. A wolf. It was larger than Yegor had expected. Thin, with tucked-in sides, but powerful. It held a fluttering chicken in its teeth. Noticing the man, the predator froze for a moment. Its eyes burned with a yellow fire. Yegor raised his rifle, but in his haste, he forgot everything. The porch steps, frozen over during the day, had turned into an ice rink. His foot slipped. He lost his balance and fell backward with a dull thud, hitting his head and leg hard. The rifle flew several meters into a snowdrift, becoming a useless piece of iron. Pain shot through his leg, and his vision darkened for a second. Seeing this, the wolf dropped its prey. An easy target was much more tempting. It turned around and, crouching low to the ground, slowly and inexorably, moved toward the defenseless old man lying on the ground. The seconds stretched into eternity. Yegor saw the bared fangs, the drops of saliva freezing in midair, and felt the deathly cold emanating from the beast. He knew it was the end. At that very moment, when the wolf was preparing for its final, deadly leap, something happened that he could not have expected. A dark flash darted from the porch. Thunder, almost a year old but still a puppy against an adult wolf, made no sound. All his fury, all his devotion and love for the man who had saved him, were concentrated in one desperate throw. He did not aim for the throat or the muzzle. Instinct told him the only right decision. He clung to the wolf's hind leg with a death grip, hanging on it with all his weight. The predator howled in pain and surprise. He turned around, trying to shake off the insolent puppy. But Thunder held on tight. The wolf shook his head, snapping his teeth inches from his head, but he did not open his jaws. It was an unequal fight, a fight the puppy couldn't win. The wolf twisted around and managed to hook him with its sharp claws and throw him aside. Thunder rolled across the snow with a squeal. The wolf, enraged, limping and forgetting about the old man, turned to his offender to finish him off. But he didn't take one thing into account. He didn't take the second offender into account. The moment he stepped toward the wounded puppy, a piercing, wild cry rang out from the roof of the woodpile stacked against the wall of the house. Pushinka, who had climbed to the very top, pushed the heaviest log with her paws. It rolled down, pulling the others with it. A veritable avalanche of heavy, frozen logs fell on the stunned wolf's head. One of the gnarled stumps hit him right on the spine. The wolf let out a yelp that was a mixture of pain, fear, and surprise. This new, incomprehensible enemy attacking from above frightened him more than the puppy's fangs. With his tail tucked between his legs and looking around wildly, he rushed away, disappearing into the saving darkness of the forest. Only 3 remained in the snow-covered yard. The old man trying to get up, the wounded puppy whimpering in pain, and the cat on top of the woodpile, watching the fleeing enemy with burning green eyes. The silence that followed the wolf's escape was deafening. It pressed on his ears, mingling with the ringing in Yegor's head. Overcoming the sharp pain in his leg and the dull throb in the back of his head, he rolled onto his side and crawled on all fours toward Grom. The puppy lay in the snow, tucking his wounded paw under him, whimpering quietly and plaintively. Blood oozed from a deep scratch on its side, staining the white snow scarlet. Yegor crawled to it and collapsed beside it, breathing heavily. He reached out his trembling hand and placed it on the puppy's head. "Hush, my boy. Hush. You're my hero," he whispered, his voice breaking. At that moment, Pushinka jumped silently from the woodpile. She approached them, paused for a moment, assessing the situation with her intelligent eyes, and then went over to Grom and began to lick his wound carefully, like a mother. Her rough tongue cleaned the torn edges of snow and dirt. Grom stopped whimpering and only shuddered occasionally. The old man watched this scene, and something inside him finally broke. The icy armor he had worn for decades crumbled to dust. The two little creatures he had saved from certain death had just, without hesitation, risked their lives for him. They didn't just live in his house, they protected him. They were his family. For the first time since Maria's death, tears streamed from Yegor's eyes. Hot and burning, they flowed down his wrinkled cheeks, mixing with the melting snow. He did not try to hold them back. He cried from the pain, from the fear he had just experienced, but most of all, from the gratitude and love that overwhelmed him. Summoning his strength, Yegor managed to get up. His leg was swollen and unresponsive, but leaning against the wall of the barn, he hobbled to the house. He returned with a first aid kit and an old blanket. Carefully, as if it were the most precious treasure, he wrapped Grom in the blanket and carried him into the house in his arms. Pushinka followed close behind, not straying a step. He spent the whole night on the floor next to the puppy. He washed his wounds with hydrogen peroxide and applied a tight bandage, as his father, also a forester, had once taught him. Pushinka lay on the other side, pressed against her friend's side and warming him with her body heat. By morning, Grom had fallen into a restless sleep, and Yegor, exhausted and broken, had fallen asleep right in his chair. He woke up to someone insistently poking his arm with a wet nose. It was Grom. He stood on 3 paws, wagging his tail, and his eyes shone with the same boundless devotion as before. The pain was still there, but life had won. Pushinka sat on the table and watched them intently, like a strict doctor satisfied with the condition of his patient. Yegor slowly slid from the chair to the floor, sat down, and hugged them both tightly. "Family," he whispered, and that word, spoken aloud in the empty house, filled him with a new, deep meaning. His own leg was seriously injured, a severe bruise, and perhaps a fracture. He could only walk with difficulty, limping heavily. This meant that in the near future he would not be able to hunt or go to the village for food. Their supplies were running out. A new, silent and invisible threat loomed: hunger. A week passed. Yegor stretched the remaining grains and flour as best he could. There was no meat at all. He divided every crumb between the 3 of them, giving most of it to his pets. Grom, although on the mend, still needed extra nutrition to recover. Yegor looked longingly at the forest. Before, he could have found food for himself. But now, with his injured leg, he was as helpless as a child. One morning, waking up with a gnawing feeling in his stomach, he saw Pushinka sitting at the door and scratching insistently. When he opened it, she did not run out into the yard, but looked at him, then at the forest, and uttered a short, demanding meow. She repeated this several times, as if calling him to follow her. At first, Yegor didn't understand what she wanted, but the cat was unusually persistent. Leaning on the stick he had cut for himself to use as a crutch, he followed her out onto the porch. Pushinka immediately ran to the edge of the forest, stopped, looked back, made sure he was following, and ran forward again. She was leading him. With curiosity and distrust, Yegor hobbled after her. She did not go far, keeping him in her sight at all times. They had walked about 200 meters when the cat stopped at an old, half-rotten stump and looked at Yegor again. Then she began to actively dig at the base of the stump with her paws. Yegor came closer and saw something that made him hold his breath. Under the snow, in a small niche at the roots, were several neatly stacked voles and a frozen squirrel. It was a cache. Her cache, her hunting trophies, which she had saved for a rainy day. And now she was sharing them with him, with the man who had become her family. Yegor knelt down in front of the little hunter and looked at her for a long time. At that moment, he realized that nature was smarter and more generous than any human being. This little predator, whom he had once saved, was now saving him. This unexpected help gave them a few more days. Yegor's leg was healing slowly. He knew that the mouse supplies would not last long. He had to do something. And then he remembered Anna Sergeevna, the veterinarian. She was the only person in the village he had contact with. Maybe she could help. But how could he let her know? There had never been a telephone in his hut, and he couldn't walk dozens of kilometers. Despair began to creep up on him again. He sat on the porch, looking at the snow-covered road, and felt trapped. Grom, as if sensing his mood, came up and laid his head on his knees. Yegor stroked his thick fur and thought. There had to be a way out. And then his gaze fell on an old mailbox nailed to a post at the turn of his forest path. No one had written to him in a long time, but the mail truck passed by once a week on the main forest road, serving distant villages. It was a chance, a slim one, but the only one. He took a sheet of paper, and his rough fingers, accustomed to the axe, struggled to write a few words. To Anna Sergeevna. Need help? Igor. He didn't write what kind of help he needed, not wanting to seem pathetic. He just hoped she would understand. But how to get the note to the mailbox? It was almost half a kilometer away. For his leg, it was an insurmountable distance. And then he looked at Grom. The dog had grown and grown stronger. The blood of the smartest service dogs flowed in his veins. What if? A crazy thought flashed through his mind. He took his old Ushanka hat, which Grom knew well by its smell, put the note in it, tied the strings tightly, and showed it to the dog. Grom, mailbox, take it, mailbox, he repeated, pointing toward the road. At first, the dog didn't understand, wagging his tail, trying to turn everything into a game. But Yegor was persistent. He put the hat in his teeth and repeated the command over and over, pointing in the direction. And suddenly, something changed in the dog's eyes. It was as if he understood the seriousness of the situation. He grabbed the hat tightly, turned around, and limping on his still healing paw, ran along the path to the road. Yegor watched him go, his heart pounding with hope and fear. Everything now depended on his dog's intelligence and loyalty. Grom ran. The snow was deep and loose. Each step was difficult. His wounded paw ached, but he stubbornly moved forward. The smell of his owner, which permeated his old hat, was a beacon for him, and the desperate insistence in Yegor's voice was an order that could not be disobeyed. He did not fully understand the meaning of the word box, but he knew exactly the direction the man was pointing. Instinct led him along the barely visible trail. After a few minutes, which seemed like an eternity to Yegor, who remained on the porch, the dog disappeared behind the trees. The old man was left alone with the silence and his fears. Had he done the right thing by sending the wounded animal away? What if Grom ran into the wolf again, or simply couldn't find his way back? Questions swarmed in his head, but there were no answers. All he could do was wait. Half an hour passed. An hour. The sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of pink and purple. Yegor did not move from his spot, his gaze fixed on the place where his dog had disappeared behind the trees. Hope slowly faded, replaced by a dull ache. And suddenly, a familiar figure appeared on the path. Thunder! He was coming back, without his hat. He ran up to Yegor and, breathing heavily, nudged his nose against his hand, wagging his tail. Did it work? Did it really work? The old man hugged the dog as tightly as he could. Now the hardest part remained: to wait and hope that the postman would notice the hat, and Anna Sergeevna would receive the message and understand it correctly. 2 days passed in agonizing anticipation. The food was completely gone. All that remained was water and a little herbal tea. Yegor, Grom, and Pushinka shared the last 3 mice from the cat's stash between them. They were all weak. At night, Yegor dreamed of Maria. She was standing on the threshold of their house, smiling and calling him. But he couldn't take a step because of his sore leg. He woke up in a cold sweat. On the morning of the 3rd day, when he had almost lost all hope, he heard a distant but distinct sound, the rumble of a car engine. The sound was getting closer. It was not a logging truck or a random car. The sound was familiar to him. It was an old UAZ. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be? He hobbled to the window. A familiar car was making its way along the forest road, leaving deep tracks in the snow. Anna was behind the wheel. Yegor jumped out onto the porch, feeling no pain in his leg. The car stopped, and Anna Sergeevna got out, carrying 2 large bags. Yegor Matveyevich, what happened to you? I got your hat. The postman Vasily almost lost his mind when he saw it in the mailbox. He brought it to me right away. I realized that something serious had happened, she chattered, approaching him. Her face was worried. Seeing his limp and haggard face, she understood everything without words. Okay. First we eat, then you tell me, she said decisively. She went into the house and began to lay out the food on the table. Bread, stew, cereals, milk. Grom and Pushinka, sensing the smell of food, immediately appeared nearby, but did not rush to the bags, instead sitting at a distance, waiting patiently. This simple display of discipline touched Anna deeply. While Yegor, embarrassed by his ravenous appetite, devoured his food, Anna examined his leg. It's not a fracture, but a dislocation and severe ligament strain. You need rest, Matveyevich. And a good ointment, she said, taking a tube of medicine out of her bag. And then Yegor told her everything. About the wolf, about the unequal fight, about how his 2 little pets saved his life. He spoke incoherently, pausing at times, but Anna listened without interrupting, tears welling up in her eyes. When he finished, she was silent for a long time, looking at Grom sleeping peacefully by the stove, and at Pushinka washing herself on the windowsill. They're not just animals to you. They're real heroes, she said quietly. Her arrival was a salvation for them. She left Yegor with enough food for a couple of weeks, made him a tight bandage for his leg, and promised to visit him until he was back on his feet. When she left, Yegor felt less alone for the first time in many years. He didn't just have his animals, he had a friend. From that day on, life in the forest hut returned to normal, but something had changed imperceptibly. Now there was no room for despair. There was hope, there was gratitude, and there was a love that grew stronger every day between three very different beings whom fate had brought together in the middle of a harsh winter. They had gone through fire and ice, and now their union was as strong as the ancient trees surrounding their home. Spring was coming. It announced itself timidly but persistently. First, with frequent drips from the roof, then with a blue, high sky and a sun that not only shone but also warmed. The snow in the forest began to settle, darken, and cover itself with a crust of ice that could be walked on without sinking. Yegor's leg had almost healed, and he no longer needed a cane. Grom had finally recovered from the wound that left a long scar on his side, now covered with fur. A badge of honor for his courage, Pushinka had turned into a real beauty of a cat. Her fur was shiny, and her huge, fluffy tail was her pride and joy. One morning, Yegor went out onto the porch and froze. The air smelled different. It smelled of damp earth, rotten leaves, and something else, something elusive and exciting. It was the smell of new life. He looked at his pets. Grom was excitedly chasing the first, still sleepy bumblebee, and Pushenka was sitting on the porch railing, squinting in the sun as if soaking up its warmth. At that moment, Yegor felt completely happy. He had survived the most terrible winter of his life, a winter that could have been his last. But instead, it had given him a new family. He could no longer imagine his life without loud barking and quiet purring. But he did not yet know that the past, which he thought was long buried, was already preparing a new, unexpected blow for him. On the very day he was rejoicing in the arrival of spring, an unfamiliar car arrived in the village. It was an expensive black SUV that looked out of place against the backdrop of the village houses. A well-dressed middle-aged man with a confident and piercing gaze got out of it. He went into the local store and, after buying a bottle of water, casually asked the saleswoman if anyone in the area had seen a German Shepherd puppy and a Maine Coon kitten that had gone missing in the winter. The saleswoman, Aunt Clava, an observant and talkative woman, watched the stranger with a long look. Something about him didn't sit right with her. There was no sorrow in his eyes when he asked about the lost animals, but rather a cold, businesslike calculation, as if he were looking not for pets, but for a lost, valuable item. In a small village, news spreads faster than the wind. Within an hour, the whole neighborhood knew that some rich guy in a black SUV was looking for purebred puppies and kittens and was even offering a reward. This news, passed from mouth to mouth, reached the veterinary clinic. When a young nurse told Anna Sergeevna about it, she froze. A German Shepherd and a Maine Coon, lost in winter. Too many coincidences. Anxiety for Yegor and his pets squeezed her heart. She knew that this man would not stop until he found what he was looking for. Without a moment's hesitation, she dropped everything, locked up the clinic, and got into her UAZ. She had to warn Yegor. She raced along the soggy spring road, kicking up fountains of mud and slush. Her intuition screamed that she had to make it in time. When Anna pulled up to the hut, Yegor was outside. He was repairing an old bench, and Grom and Pushinka were helping him as best they could. The dog was carrying splinters, and the cat was chasing shavings. Seeing Anna's car, Yegor smiled. Her visits had become a familiar joy for him. But when he saw the worried look on her face, he immediately became serious. "What's wrong, Anya?" he asked. She quickly and incoherently began to tell him about the stranger in the village and his questions. And just as she was describing his car, the roar of a powerful engine came from around the bend in the forest road. A black, shiny SUV slowly but surely crawled over the bumps, approaching the house. It stopped a few meters away from them. The door opened, and the same man got out. Confident, well-groomed, wearing an expensive jacket, he was a stranger in this forest, a visitor from another world. He glanced at Yegor, Anna, and then his eyes stopped on Grom and Pushka. Recognition flashed across his face and was immediately replaced by a satisfied, possessive smile. "Here are my runaways," he said loudly, his voice unpleasantly oily. Grom, who had been looking at the car with curiosity, suddenly tensed. He stepped between Yegor and the stranger, and a low, warning growl escaped from his chest. Pushinka, sitting on the railing, arched her back and hissed like a snake. "These are my animals," the man repeated, taking a step forward. "I'm their breeder, Victor. I have all the paperwork for them. Looks like you found them. I'm willing to pay you for your trouble. Let's say 10,000. He reached into his inside pocket for his wallet. Yegor remained silent. He just stared at the man, a cold fire burning in his gray eyes. He saw before him not an owner, but a traitor. Someone who had abandoned these little ones to die in a blizzard. "They're not for sale," Yegor said quietly but firmly. Victor raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Listen, old man, don't make this difficult. These are expensive animals, especially the cat. I didn't bring them back to argue with you. Give them to me nicely." He took another step. Grom responded to this movement with a furious, muffled bark, baring his fangs. He wasn't attacking, he was just marking a boundary that couldn't be crossed. "Calm your dog down," Victor shouted. "My dog," Yegor calmly corrected him, "and my cat. You threw them out. Now they're mine. They're my family. Go away." "Family?" Victor laughed an unpleasant, rattling laugh. "Who are you? An old hermit? I'll give them a better life. Shows, elite food. And you? This dump?" He gestured toward Yegor's house. At that moment, Anna stepped forward. "I think you'll have to leave," she said in an even, icy voice. "Otherwise, we'll have to call the police. Abandoning animals in danger and cruelty to animals are covered by Article 245 of the Criminal Code. I think that as a respectable person, you don't want any trouble with the law, right?" Victor faltered. He looked from Anna to Yegor, then back to the growling dog. He saw two unyielding people and two animals ready to defend their home to the last. He realized that there would be no easy victory. There would be a scandal, the police, publicity, and his respectable life did not provide for that. He had come to pick up something valuable, not to get involved in a dirty business with some old man from the forest. His face contorted with anger. "Choke on your mutts," he shouted, turning away. He got into his car, slammed the door, and the SUV, scattering mud, roared away, taking with it the last reminder of that terrible winter night. Silence reigned once again in the clearing. All that could be heard was Grom's heavy breathing and Yegor's pounding heart. He placed his calloused hand on the dog's head and stroked him. "It's okay, boy. It's okay. He's gone." Pusinka jumped off the railing and rubbed against his leg, purring loudly. Anna looked at them, a warm smile playing on her lips. The threat had passed. The last shadow of the past had been banished. Another year passed. Spring returned, filling the forest with birdsong and the scent of young leaves. Yegor Matveyevich sat on the porch of the old hut, on the very bench he had repaired a year ago. He didn't look his 70 years. His eyes shone with life and serenity. At his feet lay a huge, stately, handsome dog, a German shepherd named Grom. On the railing, gracefully waving her luxurious fluffy tail, sat a magnificent Maine Coon cat named Pushinka. The three of them watched the sunset, which painted the sky in golden and crimson tones. They were together. They were home. And this was not a story about how a puppy and a kitten found a home. It was a story about how three lonely creatures found a family in each other and saved each other from the most terrible winter of their lives. Do you think Anna was right to threaten Victor with the police and the law? Or is it better to use other methods in such situations?